This is Prairie Monk, your Prairie Monk, WEFT Champaign 90.1 on your FM dial. And it's May the 24th. And I'm going to go back to Rantoul again in the Pope Prairie. We're up there on Monday. And we've been looking at this a lot. We're very pleased with it. And the surroundings. So I want to expand a little on last week's session and report. So we were there on Monday after a fairly heavy rain. So it was wet. But we wear blucher boots, Wellington boots, and so we can walk around in a slop. But we tend to do it sensibly, and we know where the water is. So Ron Sleater came again with more fencing, and we finished that. Probably about 30 fence posts, distance apart, about less than the width of a car. So. And then he continued to spot herbicide. We discussed spot herbiciding some because it's about the only thing you can do to get rid of toozle, but it's almost impossible any other way. But glycosates get quite a bit of criticism, but sometimes it's because they're additives in the glycosates. So if you use the chemicals that are glyphosate only, it has less forever chemical. And so we watch that. We're looking at the bulldozer site, and we've looked at it before, and there's a little bit of mounds there. The Department of Transportation used to dump there, and we have been in contact with people who might be able to do a little bulldozing there or planing things out, but it makes it very, very difficult to maintain. So we're watching the north end mainly at the moment. Doesn't look like Prairie, but it's our entrance corridor. You come in by Route 45, 1 mile north of Rantoul, about 18 miles from West, and or downtown Champaign. You go through Rantoul, about 1 mile north. You move out around the cemetery, and then at the next section road, which is indicated by a tall cell phone tower on the right in the farmer's field. So if you turn left and go towards the railroad line, you'll encounter an old road. On the left-hand side is our Prairie, and there's a substantial yellow gate that's been put there by Department of Transportation. To the north, there is a space for parking on the same old Route 45. It's an old 45, not used anymore, but it was a highway. So it's nice and wide, so you can go in there and park, and that DOT is okay with that. I went off to do some homework. My homework is that I'm looking at the spaces around our 9 acres. There's roadside space because there was a dual highway to be there, and 57 went in, so the dual highway has been bought, and it's been planted to ash trees, which have succumbed to the emerald ash borer. And there's also some cypress trees. It's a wide facility, and it occupies a little hill, and that little hill has had a cutting made through it so that the embankments on either side are at about 45 degrees, and they're very good visual corridor. And that's partially why the Pope family had it as a billboard territory. It not only has some roadside ambiance, but it has a visual corridor for headlights and the like. So I got onto the east side of that highway, the new 45 that goes around the cemetery, and I started to walk south. It's about a mile. You don't do it too fast. There's lots of brome grass and pasture grass and roadside grasses. And I'm intrigued because not only does it have a slope up, but it has a crown between the top of the road and the farmer's field. It's a little on the weedy side, some blackberries and autumn olives and teasel. And so I waddled down there, just trying to envisage what this added space might be if we were to encourage the Department of Transportation to put in useful habitat rather than unused brome grasses and fescues and what have you. The grasses are beginning to grow. They're early spring growers, and as we get more into the spring, it takes energy to walk down there. But here and there are some native plants, dock and compass plant, and even some starry-eyed grass. So it's just a sprinkling, not very much. It needs to be upgraded. This area is not subject to mowing because the angle on the roadside is a little steep, and the piece on top is awkward to get to. So we think about this a lot by putting roadsides into habitat, which has been happening around the state. You're reducing the amount of mowing that gets done, and that's a problem for the people who are employed to do mowing. And we think that one of the things we could do is to train people to do different jobs, to establish habitat and the like. So I was thinking about this. It has to be something that's fun to do and interesting to do. And it's a little bit different than sitting on a huge mower with a 15-foot mowing deck behind. I keep wandering down there, and then they come to an open space, and it's probably about 2 acres, perhaps not that much, but it's there because there is drainage. There are drainage problems coming off the Bloomington Moraine. The Bloomington Moraine had ice and meltwater coming off it. So every so often, as you walk east-west on the Bloomington Moraine, you encounter these outwash plain creeks that run into the outwash that's in front of the moraine. And the outwash plain is very flat, thus the word flatfield. But these little sites make it awkward to do anything like agriculture. There are also perched water tables. And a perch water table is like if you're on the Yankee Ridge Moraine, which kind of terminates in the Rantoul area, uh, it means that there's a layer of clay that catches the water. And often the morainic activity left a hollow which really has no outlets. So that gets filled with water very quickly. And it's very hard to plant. The tractors take the seeding lines and plow lines down the hill to what becomes a wetland in the spring, and that encourages the water to erode, whether it's in the perch water table or outside it, draining into the traditional drains. Those perch water tables have to be replanted usually because they don't dry up very quickly. So if you've planted in dry time, then that's a waste of seed, and it's also going to put more fertilizer into the waterways, and you're going to have to replace the fertilizer. Jason Bleach wrote into the so not the iPhone. Anyway, the media, and he was saying that there are CRPS and NRCS programs that actually pay farmers to put that sort of territory into habitat, and they will provide habitat seed. And the advantage of that is that it often pays more than the sometimes miserable crop that grows on the borrow pit, on the detention pond. Ah, yes, the perched water table. Got to get your definitions straight here. So there's Department of Transportation adjacent to us, and there's across the road, there's farmland, and I often wonder if that farmland, the low-lying parts, could be reconstituted as habitat. On the west side of the road, we look over 9 acres of farmland that's not being used at the present time. It's in set aside, and we would love to buy that for extra prairie. The cemetery has bought a 6-acre plot nearby, and they actually planted prairie in there, but they're ready for use. It's very low and waterlogged at times. Put a road through, so that would help us have access to the 9 acres, and we would plant it back to prairie, and perhaps even have a visitor center there. And the extra space would allow us to encourage the Department of Transportation to look at their roadside, wide roadside, up the hill to over the Bloomington Moraine, past Ludlow, past the Outwash Plain Creek to the Paxton Moraine, and to Paxton. So we think that our efforts would encourage further thoughts. So let me look at the surrounds. One of the things south of the cemetery, there's a swampland area which is just like what I imagine Flatville to be like when the glaciers left, the climate warmed up, and uh, the swamplands were there, and that they're not there for all the year. They're usually drained, but the swampland to the south of the cemetery is very poorly drained, and it doesn't look like there's a good draining system that could be instituted. It's just north of Rantoul City, so it's probably candidate for a Walmart or something like that, but anyone that went there to do anything with it would have to put in 6 million tons worth of soil to make it viable. So we look at that as a possible extension of the corridor that we're looking at, which goes from Rantoul up the Bloomington Moraine and over, and what you've heard before. So if we're in Rantoul, and I'm walking this corridor, and I'm very familiar with it. There's been several attempts to put introductory prairie in at the north end, and so the old 45, which goes behind the cemetery, comes right down to Rantoul, and there's a little piece which is roadside that would get you into a east-west corridor. There's the pumpkin vine. The pumpkin, because it waddled its way across the country like a pumpkin vine, and that makes a contact with an east-west corridor. If you go a little further south through Rantoul, you find a 9-acre landfill, which is kind of in regrowth succession crud trees, and is not very interesting at the moment, but it also could be habitat. And that landfill is just a little south of Rantoul. We're thinking about tourism, and we're thinking about looking at these places and looking at them in perhaps 50 years' time when they might be reconstituted to something better. So a little bit down the road is Thomasboro, and Thomasboro has had an interurban there too, and they've planted, or the Department of Transportation has planted ash trees there. So this week I see that the ash trees have all died and they've all been taken down, and something else is going to happen there. A little further on, we used to have an elevator there, a nice little wooden elevator. We tried to buy it. There's a weighbridge alongside it. It was really quite an icon, and people could meet there, and we lost that one, which reminds us that we don't think big enough, then some of the things that make the big enough welcome and important will disappear. So the elevator got burned and salvaged, and the weighbridge has been taken out. But at that location, you could run back toward the Illinois Central Railroad and take a little old road that parallels the railroad line down through Leverett, and eventually you waddle down to Lincoln Avenue. So we're thinking of places that could be to the south. Now we look at the east and west. Perhaps first we'll look at the north, because the north has this existing wide right-of-way, and it has this interesting transect that goes from the wet outwash plain up the ridge with medium watered areas to dry areas on the top, and then down to Ludlow. And Ludlow was the terminus of the Illinois Central Railroad at some time. And there's history there that reminds us that some of the settlers that got off the train at Ludlow encountered Prairie. And if they came without much food and without much shelter, they didn't quite know what to do. And one family of about 6, the husband went off to try and find a way out of the terminal. And the family stayed, but in effect they all died in the long run because they weren't very well prepared for that stop. So this history in Ludlow, it's an independent school district. It has a huge elevator, and for people who don't see this sort of agriculture, a huge elevator is rather impressive. A little township village, and so trails of the prairie type, or any trails for that matter, encourage restaurants and shops, and so often small villages like Ludlow get restored as a trail goes through. So we're going a little further north, and there's an outwash plain creek to the Paxton Moraine. The outwash plain creek still has its old Route 45 concrete road there, but the bridge has gone, so the bridge would have to be replaced. And then you come to some very good parts of that corridor that are excellent prairie. The Grand Prairie Friends actually rents part of it, and then the old Route 45 peters out, and for about a 9 miles south of Paxton, the new Route 45 goes on to the old Route 45 and follows through all the way to Lake Papua South on the old road. When you get to near to Paxton, there's a Prospect Cemetery, which is just alive with prairie. And at the moment, there's a little plant which is yellow, and it's called a lousewort. It's not a very friendly name, but it's flowering at about this time of the year, and it gives that cemetery, Prairie Prospect, was the name of the given to the Paxton for a while. So Prospect survived. The name Prospect survived. But if you take that little back road into the Paxton, you encounter where was the Royer High School we tried to save, and Paxton tried to save, but didn't. So we're looking at a west side school that could be a visitor center for bikers, hikers, and visitors on the road. And you have to know that this road was a highway. It was a dual-lane highway. And now most of the traffic is on 57 to the west. So this is a quite nice road for traveling. It can have vehicles, the eco-tourist vehicles that could come off at Kankakee and waddle their way down, stop at Gilman, was perhaps a side trip to Sport Seeker, something about the water in that area, some of which is artesian water. That means it comes up and flows by itself with pressure from underneath. There's history in secret societies there. There's Augie Keitzman history. He was into the natural history of the area. He was interested in early settlement. and he also became a chief morning star as he worked with various Indian Native American tribes that met in the Watseka area. And there are other things you might like to do if you go further north. There's also Kankakee, which has a nice Frank Lloyd Wright building on the lake that goes with Kankakee. And so we're thinking you could take tourists off at Kankakee and have them come down that corridor through Buckley and through Onaga and sort of look around. Augie Keitzman put together some of the history of early settlement there. So there are signs, interesting signs. He would write in all uppercase, and one sentence would be butt right up against the other. And he's always signed by Augie Keitzman. So some of those signs are still left. He and his wife are buried in Onaga Cemetery, which also has some history. One Civil War person is buried there, but he's also buried somewhere else, which means that somebody probably was a stool pigeon for the situation where a prominent northerner got to be in the southern domain as a spy, and he was caught when a mentor got into hospital and he went visiting. Then he was caught as a spy, and so presumably put to death. So he's buried somewhere, and also in Onaga Cemetery. So it's just that the sort of friendly stories around. And each community has these stories. Often they're oral, which is a little bit disappointing because they carry on from generation to generation, and you're never quite sure how much is truth and how much is added on by the storyteller. But there is a basic, there are basic facts that don't quite change. So it's sometimes you can go to Onaga Cemetery, and the local thespians, the actors, will stand alongside the grave of their relative or someone that they represent, dressed in the period costume, and tell you about that particular person. And that sort of thing is fun to do, just to see what your history is. And some of the graves are those of secret societies, modern woodsmen. You can always tell a modern woodsman grave. You can tell the stones. An orb or a log sometimes means a useful death. There are couples, and so the two tombstones are together. There are tombstones that are lying flat. But it's nice to be in a place like that. I would like to see some of that in the cemetery just north of Rantoul. I look at the names, I know the names. There's Youngman and Yeomans, excuse me. And so I know the Yeoman family. The Canes, there's the, and just looking around and putting ages together. Sometimes the limestone tombstones are suffering because acid rain will rot limestone especially. So the granite tombstones stay up much better. But so now let's go east. We go to the section road And continental glaciers are what the word says. They're continental. They're big. They're like a river. And they leave a moraine that is rolling. So if we take section road 320, 3,200 east, it rolls. And there's housing there to some extent because it's a little higher. You can look down on Rantoul. There's also some people there that we know who have a planning background with Rantoul, and we would like to enlist those sorts of people through our efforts. Going a little further along the ridge, rolling, there's a golf course that has been retired, and some of the people I talk to are riding their bikes in there and enjoying. So there's another adjunct space. We're now sort of moving out from totally close to our prairie to what's in the region. So we've looked at going south to Champaign. Now we're looking east, and what would you encounter? Well, golf course. Then there's a landfill on the hill, which is a wonder why it's there. It's sometimes going to leach down the hill, but that's okay. It was designed at a different time. If you turn around from the landfill, you can look down. You could almost run a toy billy cart down the road because it is that steep, the front end of the glacial moraine. We're going a little further. We're going towards Stillsburg, and there's a nice conservation site there, probably for pheasant hunters and the like, but it adds to the adjunct space. A little further on, the pumpkin vine line we spoke about before, with its rail trail of 3 miles through the city of Rantoul. On top of the hill, the railroad went on towards Penfield and on towards Armstrong. And there's 1 mile of remnant prairie, of railroad remnant prairie, which was the first piece of land that the Grand Prairie Friends utilized as their first acquisition. Now they have much more of that land acquisition. Not in that spot because it's narrow, and when you have narrow, you have cultivated plants and you have cultivation weeds, and it doesn't get to do very well, but it's a good indication. People walk it every once in a while and realize that it has prairie plants there that are original. Nearby, there's a little cemetery that Elizabeth, I'm forgetting Elizabeth's name, but she had relatives buried there, and she worked Wells Cemetery. So even in Penfield too, you have interesting little town. It used to have a cattle yard for putting cattle on the trains. It had an elevator. Doesn't have either of those at the present time. But it does have farm implement museum in an old school, near to an old school. that corridor moves east to Armstrong, and the wetland of the north part of the uh, Vermilion watershed. And so you have other acquisitions for hunting and reserve. So kind of interesting. A little north, there's part of the northeast portion of the forest preserve. And there's some lowland there, which is very attractive to birds and wildlife. Uh, there's a forest preserve campground there. Uh, so we've got uh, regional space, which is interesting, and you also have connectivity. So it's some of these places are near enough that birds and bees can find their way around. Then we go west from our prairie, the Polk Prairie, and once again you run in forest preserve territories, and you go to Foos Land, and at Foos Land there's a railroad line that goes through the corner of the county, and it's loaded with prairie, and you have Mennonites there, and a different ethnic background, and a little bit of swampland there, which I think ends up in the uh, Vermilion watershed. It does. It goes past west. There's a big bend there, and there's a Mennonite church there, and that water comes down and eventually goes through to Vermilion County. So now we're going north, south, east, and west. And I'm looking at my notes here. I don't want to leave out. One of the things we might want to do is to work with people who are farmers mostly, who do a lot of the mowing. And if you're closing roadsides, which is happening because the state has put together a committee to do work with roadside habitat, and Stephanie Dobbs, who was in this territory, in this region as a landscape person working with the Department of Transportation, where they have to do roadside maintenance, and sometimes they have to replace the vegetation, or sometimes they have to destroy it. So her role was to do that, and the state has decided to have her to be in charge of the whole state, and that's very interesting. And she works with the prison departments, and they have signs that say roadside management, prairie preservation work, and that is actually taking out some of the jobs that mowing people have. And it also calls for an understanding of by the public of the interesting nature of the ambiance of roadsides. It's not always interesting or exciting to drive through endless mown roadsides. And it also helps to keep people awake if you're looking out the window and seeing something that you didn't see before. So some modest re-education here might be helpful. It might be problematic because it's different from being on a John Deere tractor and doing mowing. But it requires quite a little bit of intuition and pizzazz to be a prairie nut. So I'm not sure how that would work, but if people are being paid to do that, then that's possible. Going back to Jason Bleach and the CRPS and the NRCS. CRPS is conservation, restoration, preservation. The NRCS is a federal body too that works with natural resources conservation services. And these organizations pay for habitat because we really need the habitat, if only for the bees and the creatures that pollinate for it. We've spoken a little bit about tourism, but it is possible to have, since this highway is fairly, most of the traffic is on 57, you can have roadside runoffs with kiosks and explanations of what this is all about. A little bit of history, a little bit of secret society, a little bit of modern agriculture. There are some people who come from other countries and don't really realize what corn and soybeans is about. When you have rolling territory like the Moranic territory, there's often cattle there because it's too awkward to do row crop agriculture, and it also erodes. So cattle get to be there. And that's another different form of agriculture. And I'm afraid as we go in after virus, we may be looking for different plots of agriculture which work for vegetables. And if we don't get to be able to transport in plane loads of mangoes from Brazil, we may have to adapt. So looking at all that, what do we need? Well, we need titles and deeds. We have those to our prairie. We would have to do the same to acquire another 9 acres. We would have to have a lawyer to work with that because it ain't easy. We need liaison people who can go to Springfield and talk about things. One of the things we talk about is the rail trail or the road trail, 45, old 45, which is already there. So we don't have to worry about questioning very wide trails which take out our prairie. We need media people. The thing that you're looking at now, there's a cell phone sitting on a tripod looking at my face, but better to give you a map and a chart and let you know where the area is, to have you to go to a satellite feed and look at what we're talking about. Some of these satellite feeds are so good that you can see the oil spill left by a parked car. So you can study what we're talking about. You can see the Pope Prairie, the Balboro pit. You can see the wide Department of Transportation dual highway that wasn't built. You can see the land that was acquired to provide drainage. You can see the ponded areas. So I encourage you to get on your computer and look at this sort of thing. We need historians. It might be a class of high school kids to go to the cemetery and look-see. And I was there the other day, like Monday, And one of the things I found interesting was to see a cannon from the Civil War installed with all the various, I assume, people who've lost their lives in the Civil War or have died later in a circle around. And you can read things like Kentucky. So this person came from Kentucky. A lot of our people came from Kentucky. They came to work the mines in Vermilion County. They came to work agriculture. And so I need a historian. And we need some modest income just to maintain what we have. It doesn't go without some costs. Ron Sleater has come along with $100 worth of posts, and that sort of thing is very helpful. And above all, we want someone who knows about Kickstart and how we could encourage. We have a suspicion that we need to get together 10 or 15 people who would assure that this would happen. We need to be able to assure people that they get their money back or it goes to another useful conservation if it doesn't work out. That happened with the Kickapoo Trail. It waited 20 years because there wasn't quite enough money to do it in the first place. And we need people who have the get up and go to do this. And that takes a little talent. We also need to watch the climate. And the climate is changing, folks. Instead of having a heavy winter rainfall and a heavy fall rainfall and drought in the summer, we're starting to get showers all the way through, and that makes planting hard. It makes harvest hard. Sometimes in the Dakotas, they're still got unharvested corn from last year. So we may be having to think about our native plants. Are there any native plants that have rosins or chemicals that we would like to preserve before we let the prairie that's our heritage go extinct? So in there we have to have some credentials, and that means we have to list some of the things we've done. The natural areas, instructional development, educational resources in environmental science. Some of the things we've inspired, the Grand Prairie Friends, the Heartland Pathways, Monticello Bridge Trail, the Kickapoo Trail, the Shady Rest, Reading the Landscape, and at Parkland College, and Artist in the Landscape at the School of Art Institute in Chicago. Environmental galleries. I just got a list of pictures from Australia where I had left some prairie pictures, and they're in an art gallery at the moment. And that sort of involvement is also welcome. Correspondence. This week we had, we referred to, perhaps earlier, 63,000, sorry, I think it's 630,000 to pave an extension of the Bridge Trail in Monticello. We were listening to planning of administrative buildings in Monticello. Could be that the Pepsin factory site could be a site for development. Kevin Green has had on his front lawn or back lawn bridge ties or railroad ties that we were putting in between ties on bridges, and that were stopped because we were thought were to be danger of falling off the bridge, one of which is 100 feet off the ground. So they have been there for many years, and he sold those and put some of the money into the Kickapoo Rail Trail Foundation, including $1,000, which is in perpetuity to say that Heartland Pathways was involved in the initiation of this project. I got an interesting email from Doug DeLong. He's a regional Department of Transportation supervisor, and he said that he was sending me a picture of a butterfly and swallows, and he said 20 years ago I encountered you and I got bitten by the bug, and I have bought 5 acres across the road from me, and let's get together. So that shows that some of the things we do actually happen. So I think we're getting near to the end. I might just squeeze in a comment on geese. Banner Park District is having a hard time with geese. They have so many, and when a couple of geese has young ones, they can sometimes have up to 8 goslings, and they leave their poop everywhere. But I've been walking over on the area that's in reserve for a $250 million ice rink for development, and there were 2 geese there that I have gotten to know, and we talk to each other, and squawk, squawk, and they sit there and they recognize me, and then just 2 days ago they did a lot of squawking, and in came 3 other couples. So there were 4 couples, all couples, but also getting together. So this kind of communal. So people watch these birds and enjoy their company, and it's too bad to see that the park district or any other park district in the region can't do something to reduce it. So they try. They put strings around the pond so that creatures can't waddle into them. And, they have dogs which will chase them. But the theory is to have a team come in and harvest them and just sell or give away the meat. So I'm not quite sure how you can solve that problem. Part of it is that a lot of detention ponds went in, and when you're in the city, the temperature of the landscape is a little 3 degrees higher than the regional, so they didn't any longer have to go to southern Illinois to get the weather that they liked. They had it right here in Champaign and Urbana, and they had it in Chicago. I can remember going to one of the research places where there was a nice pond, and it was absolutely loaded with Canada geese. So think about your landscape. This is Dave Monk, your Prairie Monk, WEFT Champaign, 90.1 on your FM dial, and I hope you support WEF to do this, and I hope you also support the public television, which allows us to take this program and put in pictures. It takes us a little bit of a tassel to put in pictures. I didn't realize you could take a program from YouTube and put it into a Vegas program, and so I'm learning, and it's not easy, but the internet has helped us a lot, and so you need to give support to WEF and Banner Public Television for what we do in cooperation. So once again, this is Dave Monk, your Prairie Monk, WEFT Champaign, 90.1 FM dial, and enjoy your landscape and think about developing it.